Good morning, everyone. So what we're doing, as Amy mentioned, is a refresher for braided funding. And so much of this, if you've seen any of our previous braided funding presentations, you will be familiar with this stuff. But I know we do have a lot of new people. And with WIOA and the prioritizing of integrating services and new programs, this is more important than ever. So we're going to go ahead and start. Our objectives this morning, we're going to talk about what braided funding is. We're going to talk about some of the different strategies that can be utilized in a braided funding plan, the different streams that are available, and then some of the resources that are available for braided funding as well. This is just a refresher, kind of an overview. We will, at some point in the future, be releasing more videos on individual funding streams, how they can be used and incorporated into a braided funding plan. So first we want to talk about why this is important. There's an increased focus on service integration, especially with the introduction of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, as we all love to call it, WIOA, near and dear to our hearts, of course. And with service integration, we have more and more resource-intensive programming, which of course is a very political way to say more expensive. Everything we're doing is costing more because we are integrating, we are streamlining, which is going to save money, but the programs themselves are costing more. We are in a fiscally uncertain climate with, of course, everything that's happening the last couple of years with the state budget, but also states more and more are cutting back their funding to higher ed and to all sorts of things. And so there's a scarcity of resources, high level of competition for the resources that are available, and sustainability and stability are serious issues for any program. We want to be able to sustain and to scale and to move forward. So the reality, of course, as I mentioned, we've got reductions in federal, state, and even private foundation funding. Performance-based funding is a big thing and will continue to grow. And per-student educational costs need to come down. So to do that, we need to build new partnerships, focus on sustainability, institutional transformation, leadership support, and investment priorities. We need to improve competitiveness for our grants and build our efficiency and effectiveness, thereby doing more with less, which as a community college system, we're very familiar with doing more with less. It's what we've always done, and it's what we'll continue to do. There are, of course, challenges to sustaining and scaling programs like these. Most of them are initiated with one-time grants. For example, the ICAPS program grew out of the Accelerating Opportunity Initiative from Jobs for the Future, which was begun with a one-time grant that had a specific lifetime period tied to it. And so once that period was over, the initial funds went away. And so we had to figure out how to sustain and to scale from there. Different funders have different requirements, different eligible populations, different time frames, and accountability expectations can differ from funding source to funding source. And so in addition to that, key partners may be missing from the initiative. We may have a great team of people from all the different partners, but maybe not all of the partners who could be of assistance are at the table. And so we need to make sure that we are including and reaching out and engaging all the partners that can help us make this a reality. And these programs remain an initiative. They're not yet the new normal, though this is changing with WIOA and its increased focus on service integration. So what is braided funding? Braided funding refers to the weaving together of federal, state, and private funding streams, as well as the development of funding strategies that support these programs. This is from Jobs for the Future. Their focus was in this was supporting high-quality career pathway programs to lead to employment. And this is a graphic from Jobs for the Future from JFF showing how in a braided funding plan, you want to have your strategies, your funding streams, as well as your services and support, and you braid them all together in order to help your program maximize and capitalize upon what is available and how it works. So with braided funding strategies, these are ways to create more funding opportunities independent of specific funding streams. These can include things like reducing costs, raising new revenue, and redirecting existing revenue. These are things that we've all been doing a lot in the last 18 months. And prior to that as well, but definitely during the last 18 months, these are things we've been focusing on with the state budget concerns. Some other examples include prioritizing funding, engaging private foundations, providing fee or tuition waivers, forming additional partnerships, and documenting impact is important. You definitely want to make sure when you're running programs like these that you keep track, not just for our sake, but for your own sake, for marketing the effectiveness of your program. You want to document the impact of your program, because showing that to your partners and to potential new partners can have a really, really great effect. With braided funding streams, these are existing multi-year sources of funding. They can come from federal programs, state programs, and also from private dollars. Some of these examples include state program funding like adult ed funds, CTE funds, things like that, institutional funding, federal program funding, grant funding, and private foundation funding as well. So I'm going to stop there really quick and just check if there are any initial questions.
Josh, I have a question. If you use the adult education funds, are you still bound by for an ICAPS program, are you still bound by the 51% instructional costs rule?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that is true.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, then we will go forward.
Yes. We have a question whether or not the PowerPoint is going to be available, and yes, Bonnie, that will be available on our website. We'll notify you when it's up, and we will notify everyone on the webinar when the PowerPoint is available, and then I know Josh has mentioned additional resources that will be available as well with the PowerPoint. So all of those will be available to everybody on the...
Amy, we could possibly put that on the ICAPS website so that as they go there anyway, they could actually get the PowerPoint from that website, correct?
Yes, everything is interchanged between the two. They're linked on both. So yeah, it'll be on both.
And we will also be, I'm working on some handouts to go along with this that are just not finished yet because I'm trying to update some pre-existing documents, and there are a lot of links that need to be updated. So as soon as those are ready, I will be, we'll have those available to you as well.
Josh, we have one additional question. If the adult education funds are used, do the students need to be also enrolled in the ABE, ASE, ESL while they are enrolled in the career course?
Yes, adult ed funds can only be used if the student is in adult ed, if that makes sense. So for instance, adult ed funds cannot be used to pay for the credit or career training piece, but for the adult ed piece, which is why we're looking at the integrated models, because then you can braid the funding together. The adult ed funds can be used to pay for the adult ed pieces, and then you tie in other funds to help pay for the rest of it to go together.
And the students would then be duly enrolled, correct?
Yes, that would be co-enrollment, yes. Okay, so we'll move into developing your model. This is a process that I thought was really well done. JFF has a model as well, and I've got a graphic for that later that has several more steps. But when you break it down, really, there's 5 main phases, and this is from the Center for Systems Integration. Phase 1 is identifying your vision. Phase 2, design your program. Phase 3 is assess your funding. Phase 4 is design your funding plan, and Phase 5 is implement and improve. So for Phase 1, we identify your vision. You need to figure out what will the program accomplish, why is it needed, and who will be served on an overall. Then you engage your partners, who needs to be a part of the effort, and what are the different ways that partners can be involved. The second phase is definition. You want to define your program. What populations do you need to serve? What are the outcomes that you want to achieve? What does the front door look like? So what does it look like from the outside? How will you market it? What is your intake process going to look like? How are you going to recruit your students? Then what are the services that are part of the program? Where are you delivering those services, and who will deliver those services? And then what infrastructure is needed in order to make the program work. Phase 3 is assessing your funding. You want to chart your current and available funding streams, figure out what the expenses are of your program and your eligible populations. This will help you when you're in the next step researching your funding streams, because as we mentioned, different funding streams can have different allowable uses, different eligible populations, different time frames, and all of this needs to be mapped out or charted out as a part of the process to do that. You want to find and assess your gaps, which JFF, Jobs for the Future, has an excellent, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's a gap tool to help you identify where your gaps are in your braided funding plan, and we will have that available to you as well. And then you want to research other funding options. When we get into Phase 4, you want to start designing your funding plan. You want to develop a coordinated funding plan, including budgeting your estimated expenses and spend downs. List allowable expenses for each funding stream. Again, Phase 3 and Phase 4 go really well. It's kind of one, but we broke them into 2 here. And then you want to develop administrative structures, any that need to be done in order to make this work, because when you are tracking everything for separate funding sources, that can require some additional administrative work, including accounting processes, delivering reports, and then all of this is tied, of course, to the reporting requirements for the different funding sources. And the last phase is implement and approve. So you want to implement your program, implement the services in the funding plan, get it going, and then after your first initial period, you want to do an evaluation, see how well it's working, and identify areas where you can improve the plan, improve the program. And then once you implement those improvements, then with your once the next period is over, then of course reevaluate and assess again and continue to improve and to get better. And this is, as I mentioned, the Jobs for the Future braided funding approach. It's the same process, but in a cyclical manner that breaks it out a little bit further. So before we move on to the potential funding sources that are out there, are there any questions?
Yes, Josh, we have a question. Can the adult education state funds be also used to pay for the tuition in specific CTE courses that we are requesting approval from ICCB? In 2014, a memo was sent to Jennifer Foster explaining this process for CTE course approval. Adult education students who enroll in these approved courses can use the Adult Education State Fund grant for tuition. So I think the question is at the beginning there.
Okay.
Can the adult education, I'll reword it for you. Can the adult education state funds be used to pay for tuition in a specific career and technical education course that we are requesting approval from ICCB?
I don't have a direct answer for that at this moment, but I'm writing it down, and I'll get the full wording from Amy afterwards. And what I'll do is I will consult and make sure to get an answer for you and get that out.
Well, let me unmute Arlene, because I might be.
Okay.
Arlene, I'm going to unmute you so you can ask that question fully.
All right.
Arlene. There you are.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, there was a memo in December of 2014 wherein it was explained that if we submit specific CTE courses that we know that our adult ed students can transition into, we need to send the form to, I think it's Brian Durham. And I don't think anybody has ever used that approach, but essentially, if the courses are approved by ICCB, then tuition from the state APPLE grants can actually be used. Now, like I said, it hasn't been done. I don't think I've heard of any other community college who's done it. So we might be the first. We actually submitted these courses, about 5 or 6 of them, to Brian. And so I want to know if it is still being in consideration, or if it was just a one-time thing that nobody really wanted to do.
Well, as you mentioned, Arlene, since no one has used it yet or done it before, it's one that I don't have experience with, so I'm going to have to consult with Jennifer and Brian to find out the official answer on that.
Do you want me to send you the memo?
Sure, and if you could, yes, if you could send that to me in an email as well as your question again, so that I can forward that on and go from there, and we'll get you an answer.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And I think that whenever you do find out that answer, since it is something new, Josh, I think that it would be really beneficial to share that answer and question with the group that actually is attending today.
Absolutely, we will share that with this registration list, and if it's something, once I get a full answer on it, if it's something that is going to be broadly effective, then we will share it out with everyone as well. Thank you, Bevan. Were there any other questions? Okay, then moving on to the programs that are available. So these are the federal programs that are broadly known to be possibly available for braided funding programs, braided funding plans. I've broken these out as CLASP did in their new toolkit, which I will talk about later, by the federal agency that administers them. So the programs administered by the Department of Labor that can be used, we have WIOA Title I Adult and Dislocated Worker and Title I Youth. Both of those are administered in Illinois by the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. But the funding actually goes down to the local level. So for almost all of these, you're going to want to reach out to whoever administers these funds in your local area to set up the partnerships. The next one is the WIOA Title III Employment Services through Wagner-Pizer. That is through the Department of Employment Services here in Illinois, or IDES. Then there's the Trade Adjustment Assistance Funds and Registered Apprenticeship and Pre-Apprenticeship. Under the U.S. Department of Education, of course, we've got WIOA Title II, Adult Ed and Literacy Funds, which are awarded through the grants to our providers. We have WIOA Title IV, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, which in Illinois is administered by the Department of Human Services Division of Rehabilitation Services, which is a mouthful, but it's DHS's DRS. We've got Pell Grants and Federal Student Aid, which can be done through Ability to Benefit. This is through the financial aid offices at the community colleges. If a program meets the requirements of an eligible career pathway as defined under the Higher Education Act, then there's a process that students can go through to become eligible for ability to benefit and release Title IV HEA funds, which is the federal student aid, includes Pell Grants, student loans, federal work study, things like that. And those can be used to help pay for tuition and fees for college credit. So in an ICAPS program is where these are going to be most useful. And then the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Funds through CTE, also at our community colleges. And then we've got administered by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, or DHHS, is Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF as we know it. And then from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, we have the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program Employment and Training Funds, which is SNAP-ENT. Okay, so for braided funding resources, I just have a couple on here, a couple really useful ones. We've got JFF's Braided Funding Toolkit, which is accessible through their website. You do have to get register for access. But if you go to application.jff.org, it takes you to the website, and that's what the page looks like there. You can request access from JFF to get in. It's because this was done under their Accelerating Opportunity Initiative, everything is still geared that way. But there are some really phenomenal resources available in there, including examples from programs on how their real their actual braided funding plans that have been used in the past. There's information about funding streams, funding strategies, how to assess your funding plan. There is a return on investment tool that's set up in an Excel spreadsheet with very detailed instructions. You can input all the information, how you're paying your team teachers, the costs that you're associating, things like that, and it has the calculations all built in to tell you what the return on investment is for your program, and you can use that in documenting your impact and in your marketing materials. And then we have CLASP'S Funding Career Pathways Toolkit. This is where the list of federal sources came from for this presentation, and in this toolkit it breaks down each funding source with a full overview, how it's been used in the past, how it can be used, examples, and more information for each of the 11 funding sources as well. It helps you to understand the key components of career pathways, identify federal resources, and then pinpoint state policy changes or actions that are needed, things like that. And you can find that on CLASP'S.org and just type into the search box funding career pathways. And this most recent edition was released in February 2016. And as you can see on the picture, it's geared entirely for WIOA. So everything in it is up to date and very useful. And that's all of the information that I have. So we'll open it up for questions, if there are any.
Josh,
Are there any questions?
I don't see any additional questions. I did just post the link for the toolkit that you were discussing. If anyone does have a question, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or type your question in the question pane.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, then that was shorter than I thought it would be, but that's okay. My email is available here. If you have further questions that you come up with later, please feel free to reach out to me, and I will answer whatever I can and find answers for you if I don't have them. And as I mentioned earlier, and as Amy mentioned earlier as well, we will be developing further resources for braided funding and also other things to help in your implementation of ICAPS and IET programs and other integrated programs further down the road, and we will let you know as soon as any of those are out.
Josh, we did have one question pop up.
Sure.
What has been the greatest challenge when working with partners on braided funding?
I would say, from what I've heard, probably the biggest challenge there, especially for community colleges, is accessing partners when there are so many different departments and divisions reaching out at once. I know a lot of colleges have moved towards a model where they have a single person who's the point person, especially when contacting employers and businesses, things like that. But that's probably the biggest issue there, is too many points of contact and oversaturation, which sometimes doesn't help when you're trying to get someone's attention. That's probably the biggest concern that I've heard about.
A follow-up question is, how can we streamline the communication?
Could you elaborate a bit?
That you were just referencing. So the first
Okay.
question was, what has been the greatest challenge? You said communication, and then Alexis is asking what we can do to streamline that communication.
Well, I would say reach out within your institution, find out who has the greatest relationship with the organization that you're trying to contact. Because if there's already a relationship out there and a trust that's been built, then capitalizing on that point of contact is probably going to be your best bet. So, for instance, with the CTE programs at your institution, they all have advisory boards. There's a person in those programs who has a good who probably has a good relationship with the individuals in those organizations. And so if you can find out who has the relationship and then get that person involved and on board and in support of what you're trying to do, and then build from there, that's going to be your best bet.
Josh, Rocky
Yes.
Wilkerson has a question on eligibility. Who determines the eligibility for the adult ed students?
In terms of what exactly?
Unmute Rocky and ask her. Rocky? Oh, she can't talk.
Yeah.
Maybe she could go a little bit further and explain her question.
Can you hear me?
Yes?
There she is.
Okay, I'm having technical issues here, but I do have a couple questions. One, regarding the eligibility requirements. Let's just say we have adult ed students in the IET and it goes on over to an ICAPS and they apply for financial aid. Will the financial aid department at the community college determine the eligibility for the adult ed students? As
Yes.
far as funding? Okay,
Yes,
so
as far as financial aid, all of the determinations regarding financial aid are done by the financial aid office, and that includes even determining the eligibility of not just the student but the program as an eligible career pathway under ability to benefit. All of those determinations are done by the financial aid office, and so the best way to try to avoid roadblocks there is to make sure that you build a relationship as well with the financial aid administrator. Help them to understand what the program is, what ability to benefit is, how those things work together, and why these are important, so that it helps to bring those roadblocks down, because a lot of the financial aid offices are not familiar or not very familiar with these programs and with ability to benefit, and we need to get the awareness out there and build the relationships in order to make that happen.
So, I mean, I'm just starting this relationship thing. I'm just now getting started on it, but I do anticipate some roadblocks. And so, what you're telling me, if I understand this correctly, is to start building the relationships now. In other words, start educating financial aid about these programs and about the eligibility requirements.
Yes.
That the way I need to move forward with this?
Yes, try building your partnerships as early as you can and to build on them, because that's going to be how you get your foot in the door. Because if they're not familiar with it, they may not be willing to take that step
Okay.
or to put in necessarily the work involved. So you want to make sure that they're aware of it and that they know all the stuff about it in order to get that, to build on that and to get it going.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh, to add to what Rocky just said and to your response to her, is that something that ICCB as an agency could somehow enlighten the financial aid individuals within those community colleges as to the integrated programs and the ability to benefit? I mean, I realize that there's a lot more to be said for on the ground and in face-to-face partnerships by the programs themselves. However, I have to wonder if it wouldn't be beneficial from something coming from the state agency that's in charge of those community colleges, letting them know about ability to benefit and the integrated programs that are currently existing and that are going to be increasing.
Because really, Bevan, this particular community college may not be doing ICAPS, may not have bridge programs, may not be doing IETs. So really, you're starting from scratch. Nothing.
Right. Exactly. Which is why I'm emphasizing to build the relationships now, because Bevan, you're absolutely right that we do need something from the state level to reach out to these administrators, and I am working on that. The ball is rolling. It's going to take a little bit to get everything in place, but I am in the process of trying to get in to do a training for the statewide financial aid administrators organization, but it's going to take some time before we can get in there because we don't have the relationship with the financial aid administrators that we do like with Adult Ed, with CTE, and so we're getting the door open and getting there, but it is going to take some time.
It's good to know that that's at least in a plan.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rocky. Anyone else? Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then I think we can go ahead and bring this to a close. I want to thank everyone for your time. Amy, go ahead.
I was just going to thank you, Josh, for presenting today. Thank everyone for attending. And just a reminder, I did put it in the chat pane. October 18th is the Octane Employability Framework Overview Part 1. And Part 2 is on October 25th, which is just the next couple weeks. And then on the 28th is the Team Teaching Continuum. So if you're working with your ICAPS or IET program and you're wanting to learn what the state is saying the stages are for team teaching, I encourage you to tune in for that webinar as well. Thank you all for attending, and have a great day.